Section 41 of the World's Best Orations, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. The World's Best Orations, from the Earliest Period to the Present Time, Volume 1, by David J. Brewer and Edward A. Allen. The Assassination of Lincoln, Lord Beaconsfield. Lord Beaconsfield, Benjamin Disraeli, 1804 to 1881. When at the age of 33 Benjamin Disraeli entered the House of Commons, he was flushed with his first literary successes, and inclined perhaps to take parliamentary popularity by storm. It was the first year of Victoria's reign, 1837, and the fashions of the times allowed great latitude for the display of idiosyncrasies in dress. It seems that Disraeli pushed this advantage to the point of license. We hear much about the amount of jewellery he wore, and of the gaudiness of his waistcoats. This may or may not have had a deciding influence in determining the character of his reception by the House, but at any rate it was a tempestuous one. He was repeatedly interrupted, and when he attempted to proceed, the uproar of cries and laughter finally overpowered him, and he abandoned for the time being the attempt to speak. Not, however, until he had served on the House due notice of his great future, expressed in the memorable words, thundered, we are told, at the top of his voice, and audible still in English history, "You shall hear me." Not 10 years later, the young man with the gaudy waistcoats had become the leading Conservative orator of the campaign against the Liberals on their Corn Law policy, and so great was the impression produced by his speeches that in 1852, when the Derby Ministry was formed, he was made Chancellor of the Exchequer. The secret of his success is the thoroughgoing way in which he identified himself with the English aristocracy. Where others had apologized for aristocracy as a method of government, he justified. Instead of excusing and avoiding, he assumed that a government of privilege, rather than that based on rights or the assumption of their existence, is the best possible government, the only natural one, the only one capable of perpetuating itself without constant and violent changes. Kept on the defensive by the forward movement of the people, as well as by the tendency towards liberalism or radicalism shown by the men of highest education among the aristocratic classes themselves, the English Conservatives were delighted to find a man of great ability and striking eloquence, who seemed to have a religious conviction that Toryism was the only means of saving society and ensuring progress. It is characteristic of his mind and his methods that he does not shrink from calling himself a Tory. He is as proud of bearing that reproach as Camilla Desmoulins was of being called a sans-culotte. When a man is thus thorough, he becomes representative of all who have his aspirations or share his tendencies without his aggressiveness. No doubt Disraeli's speeches are the best embodiment of Tory principle, the most attractive presentation of aristocratic purposes in government made in the 19th century. No member of the English peerage to the manner born has approached him in this respect. It is not a question of whether others have equalled or exceeded him in ability or statesmanship. On that point there may be room for difference of opinion, but to read any one of his great speeches is to see at once that he has the infinite advantage of the rest in being the strenuous and faith-inspired champion of aristocracy and government by privilege, not the mere defender and apologist for it. In the extent of his information, the energy and versatility of his intellect, and the boldness of his methods, he had no equal among the Conservative leaders of the Victorian reign. His audacity was well illustrated when, after the great struggle over the reform measures of 1866 which he opposed, the Conservatives succeeded to power, and he, as their representative, advanced a measure more sweeping in its nature as a reform bill than that he had successfully opposed when it was advocated by Gladstone. In foreign affairs, he showed the same boldness, working to check the liberal advance at home by directing public attention away from domestic grievances to brilliant achievements abroad. This policy, which his opponents resented the more bitterly because they saw it to be the only one by which they could be held in check, won him the title of Jingo and made him the leading representative of British imperialism abroad, as he was of English aristocracy at home. The Assassination of Lincoln. From a speech in Parliament, 1865. There are rare instances when the sympathy of a nation approaches those tenderer feelings which are generally supposed to be peculiar to the individual, and to be the happy privilege of private life, and this is one. Under any circumstances we should have bewailed the catastrophe at Washington. Under any circumstances we should have shuddered at the means by which it was accomplished. But in the character of the victim, and even in the accessories of his last moments, there is something so homely and innocent that it takes the question, as it were, out of all the pomp of history and the ceremonial of diplomacy. It touches the heart of nations and appeals to the domestic sentiment of mankind. Whatever the various and varying opinions in this House, and in the country generally, on the policy of the late President of the United States, all must agree that in one of the severest trials which ever tested the moral qualities of man, he fulfilled his duty with simplicity and strength. Nor is it possible for the people of England at such a moment to forget that he sprang from the same fatherland and spoke the same mother tongue. When such crimes are perpetrated, the public mind is apt to fall into gloom and perplexity, for it is ignorant alike of the causes and the consequences of such deeds. But it is one of our duties to reassure them under unreasoning panic and despondency. Assassination has never changed the history of the world. I will not refer to the remote past, though an accident has made the most memorable instance of antiquity at this moment fresh in the minds and memory of all around me. But even the costly sacrifice of a Caesar did not propitiate the inexorable destiny of his country. If we look to modern times, to times at least with the feelings of which we are familiar, and the people of which were animated and influenced by the same interests as ourselves, the violent deaths of two heroic men, Henry IV of France and the Prince of Orange, are conspicuous illustrations of this truth. In expressing our unaffected and profound sympathy with the citizens of the United States on this untimely end of their elected chief, let us not therefore sanction any feeling of depression, but rather let us express a fervent hope that from out of the awful trials of the last 4 years, of which the least is not this violent demise, the various populations of North America may issue elevated and chastened, rich with the accumulated wisdom and strong in the disciplined energy which a young nation can only acquire in a protracted and perilous struggle. Then they will be enabled not merely to renew their career of power and prosperity, but they will renew it to contribute to the general happiness of mankind. It is with these feelings that I second the address to the Crown. End of section 41.